What is Palantir?
Well, I'm always tempted to just sort of give a J.R.R. Tolkien literary reference where it's this round orb originally built by the elves.
Palantir's origins are straight out of Tolkien, but what does that mean for AI and national security? Check this video out.
It's this very powerful device that enables you to make sense of things in faraway places and maybe even different times. It's a very important in the Tolkien Lord of the Rings, was one of my favorite books as a kid. It's a very important plot device for all sorts of reasons I could go through, but it ultimately gets used for good, even though it can also get misused. Yeah, I was this Tolkien fan, and it was this company we started in 2003, 2004. And it was all these contradictory motivations we had. It was sort of a libertarian, deep state adjacent company to help the CIA find terrorists in ways that wouldn't violate civil liberties as much as they would if they were just relying on Luddite, low-tech, highly intrusive airport security machines and making everyone take off their shoes and stuff like that. And that was sort of the founding vision. But it was kind of, yeah, sort of this James Bond type company that
Is it still that?
it's done a decent amount of work with intelligence agencies, with the military. Probably about, roughly half the revenues are sort of government related, which is, I think, always a very difficult place to work, but I also think is sort of an important one. I'm sort of this anti-government libertarian. And so the glass half empty version is you should never work with the government because it's endlessly frustrating. And then the glass half full or glass 1/10 full version is that there's so much room for improvement. And there are so many ways that maybe the government is the single institution that could be most improved by technology. And then, I always define technology as doing more with less. And so the Palantir version would be, can we have more security with less intrusion into civil liberties? And that's what a technological solution would look like. Whereas, the standard way these ideological debates are grooved is, more with more, which I'll say would be the draconian Dick Cheney security state versus the less with less, the 20th century Luddite ACLU approach.
Palantir's origin story is fascinating. It was built on this paradox of being both libertarian and deeply embedded in government work. But isn't that exactly the kind of tension that drives the best innovation? Finding ways to make national security more effective while protecting civil liberties isn't just a challenge, it's a responsibility that tech has to rise to.
And my view is you had to try to find a third way. I worry that if you frame it as the Luddites versus the totalitarian tech people, the totalitarian tech people Cheney will always beat the ACLU after you get a terrorist attack. And so, yeah, part of the Palantir hope is that we could, it was in the aftermath of 9/11 that we started it. And the hope was we will stay a free country or a relatively free country. It's important to prevent these attacks from happening because after they happen, the civil liberties always go out the window.
Mhm. Tell me about the connections in general between the government and Silicon Valley. How deep are the ties?
I think historically they were very deep in the 50s and 60s. I think they are quite decoupled in general in the post-Cold War era, let's say post-1989. Washington, D.C. and Silicon Valley are very different places that feel very different. D.C. is sort of this functioning middle-class city from the middle of the 20th century it's the land that time forgot or something like this. And DC is too focused on government. Silicon Valley, even with all the liberal political biases, the center of energy is completely on the private sector. It's fairly low on the civic side. Even in extremely liberal San Francisco, it's just, the city governance doesn't work. Nobody cares about it. Nobody thinks about it. So somehow politics, governance, getting these things to work is something that people in Silicon Valley don't think about very much. You can almost say that this escape into virtual reality, into the internet, into the world of bits, the world of atoms got regulated and governed. And it got governed and overregulated, especially in California. And so, in a way, the natural thing for an entrepreneur or someone who wanted to make a difference in the world to do was to escape into this world of virtual reality, into the world of bits, or Southern California is more entertainment and all these parts of our world that interface with, I don't know, city zoning laws and building a house, or the schools, or the all these things have maybe gotten more neglected in California than elsewhere.
The escape into the digital world makes sense when the physical world is bogged down by regulation and inefficiency. But ignoring governance entirely only leads to deeper dysfunction. The future belongs to those who can bridge both worlds, using technology to make real, tangible improvements in the systems that shape daily life.
What sources do you trust for news?
I have a Bloomberg terminal, so I end up getting a lot of my news from there. I always think I should not trust them at all, because it is like just this official center-left establishment voice. I get physical copies still of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. I think there's sort of all these interesting ways to read the New York Times, where it's like, there's probably some way to read Pravda. And so and probably this is too confident, but I trust my ability to decode the New York Times and to actually figure out things about the world from the extremely distorted way they talk about it.
What's the most controversial idea you believe?
Probably way too many, but I don't think ideas always being controversial, I certainly don't think that makes them correct. I do have this intuition that when there are things we can't talk about, or that are somehow blocked, it doesn't necessarily make them right, but there's something about those things that's interesting to think about. But yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what's controversial at this point. The COVID vaccine. I mean, I got vaccinated 3 times, and I don't think I should have gotten vaccinated.
Yeah.
I don't think it works in any way. It probably has all these bad side effects. And 3-4 years ago, that seemed too crazy and too unscientific for me to question the vaccines. And now that doesn't even seem controversial.
Yeah.
The shift in acceptable discourse over time is fascinating. What was once an unquestioned truth can quickly become debatable, and vice versa. It highlights how much of what we consider fact is shaped by social and institutional pressures rather than pure logic or evidence.
What have been the most interesting things you've seen in anti-aging going forward? What are you most excited about regarding anti-aging?
What's crazy about it is how we're somehow not trying enough. And it's a very uncomfortable topic, because we're probably not making progress quickly enough that the two of us will live forever. And then psychologically, there are all these ways it's so uncomfortable to think about, but it's crazy how we've almost given up on making progress. And so yes, I think anti-aging, biotech generally, it should be this area where there should be so much innovation. There's so many things we should be able to do. And when I look at it, my frustration is, man, we've made some progress in cancer, really modest. We made almost no progress on things like dementia, 40 or 50 years. And I don't think these things are unsolvable mysteries. I think there should be ways really to make progress. And so I always find it shocking that we're as stuck as we are. I shifted to starting to use some of the Ozempic Mounjaro things a year and a half ago. It seems powerfully effective. There probably are all sorts of side effects that don't know what the trade-offs are, but yeah, I think there's probably some very basic stuff like getting your diet under control that we can do. It's not a panacea, but it's a big lift. And then I'm always interested in the psychological question: what if eating healthy or not eating too much? Diet means both a healthy diet, but a non-excessive diet in particular. If it's that straightforward, why are we so blocked from it? And then the meta level psychology theory, I often wonder, is where you know what you're supposed to do, and that almost becomes the excuse for not doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there probably are some esoteric secrets that need to be discovered and that could be discovered and that we're stuck on. And then there is, I think, a lot of relatively basic things that we kind of know and just are, I want to say, psychologically blocked.
Mm.
If we know the basics of longevity, diet, exercise, metabolic control, why aren't we making faster progress? Could it be that the real obstacle isn't science, but psychology? The resistance to change, even when the answers are right in front of us, might be the biggest unsolved mystery.
In the book, you talk about diversification in business as a bad strategy. Tell me about that.
Well, it was meant in the context where it's not a perfect metaphor, but I often think a good startup it's kind of like a sports team. And it's different from a sports team because it's not like a set game you're playing. But for a sports team to be effective, it really is this whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The people, there's sort of are these deeply complementary skills. You respect one another. It's not everyone's a clone, but there's a lot of complementarity. You have vigorous debates, but then you also find a way to get in sync and on the same page and move on. And so it's not an endless debating society. Yeah, if you define diversity as difference for its own sake, that's probably not quite the right metric. So
And
I like
in investing also, you talk about not having a diverse portfolio, but focusing on the area that you think is the area of growth.
Yes, I always think there aren't that many great ideas.
Mhm.
And, you could say here are 20 pretty good ideas, and maybe there's a nihilistic reality where they're all pretty good, but you can't differentiate them, and then you should invest in all 20.
Mhm.
But I think that's too nihilistic. And maybe the truth is you can actually figure out here are the one or two that are the best, and you should concentrate on those. And it's uncomfortable because it feels really risky, but actually the synonym, maybe diversification sounds good, but it's really synonymous with nihilism or not thinking.
Hedging your bets and
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're hedging your bets, but you're sort of being willfully ignorant or oblivious, and you actually know more than you think you do.
Mm.
And you should somehow bring that out. In a corporate culture, there are definitely ways that I think having vigorous internal debates are very important. And then there also are ways that it's good for people to be aligned on a product or some transcendent mission. We early on at PayPal, this is sort of a silly example. We like to say that we were a Star Wars, not a Star Trek company. And Star Trek is sort of communist because you have the transporter and you have no material shortage and there's no money in the world of Star Trek. So we have a new payment system, and then Star Wars starts with Han Solo, and he needs to get some money to pay off these debts he owes. And we were a Star Wars company, not a Star Trek company. Maybe it's not necessary for everyone to like Star Wars more than Star Trek, but
it worked.
it worked. And it would have
Yeah.
been odd in the PayPal context if someone was a crazy Star Trek fan.
True innovation comes from commitment, not cautious diversification. The best startups identify a transformative idea and pursue it relentlessly, refusing to scatter their focus. Spreading too thin across multiple ventures often leads to mediocrity instead of mastery. The companies that change the world, whether in technology, energy, or finance, were built by those willing to take a calculated risk on a singular vision. Success requires conviction, not a safety net.